How did the princess take control of our message board, even if it was just for a few seconds? It shouldn't have been possible. Our message board wasn't part of the game she'd been inhabiting. It was just a regular site, pulling all its data from the web. Nothing more. All the rules we had come to rely on, the things that had given us some sense of safety, suddenly fell apart in those few moments. If she could break through then, what did that mean for the future? Could she have done it at any time? Could she do it again? Were there limits to what she was capable of? Or were we just grasping at straws? The moment she appeared, everything we thought we knew was thrown into chaos. We went through the logs, combed every bit of data we had collected over the years, searching for anything we missed, some clue, some crack in the pattern that would explain how she did it. We had to find the missing link, the thing that would tie it all together, something that would make sense of the impossible. Then we found it. The realization hit us like a punch to the gut, and when we saw the truth, it was so obvious we couldn't believe we had missed it for so long. The princess had been there the whole time. She wasn't just in the game, she was everywhere on the board, on every page, every forum, every thread. She'd been staring at us for years, hidden in plain sight, and we were too blind to notice. She was in the banner at the top of the forum. She was in every screenshot we uploaded, every video we shared, every fan art we lovingly crafted. Every image of her was her. The princess wasn't a ghost, and she wasn't just a computer virus or a glitch in some obscure game. She was something else entirely. She was an idea, a living piece of fiction. Her power grew with every thought we gave her, with every observation we made. The more we looked at her, the more attention we gave her, the stronger she became. When we all watched that stream together, when hundreds of us focused on her at the same time, we amplified her power, gave her the strength to break through her digital prison. That's when she made her move, leaping through the images on our message board, breaking the barriers we thought kept her confined. And in that fleeting moment, she spoke to us, not through the game, but through our own space, our own sanctuary. We were terrified. We took down every image, every video, anything that might still hold a trace of her. We deleted the posts, purged the archives. But even as we did it, we wondered if it was already too late. Had we already given her too much power? Could simply remembering her be enough to let her in again? One by one, people in our community started disappearing. At first, we thought they were just going offline, maybe shaken by what happened, taking time to process. But as the days turned to weeks, the silence became unnerving. They weren't just logging out, they were vanishing. Some left cryptic messages before they went dark, saying they were going off the grid, trying to escape. Others left nothing at all. I tried reaching out, but I couldn't tell if they were truly gone or if they had gone into hiding, afraid to make any noise that might draw her attention. Either way, I feared the worst, and I knew that I could be next. We all could. You see, the princess is fighting for her survival now. For her, being forgotten is the same as dying. She needs us to think about her, to remember her. That's the source of her power. Every image of her, every whisper of her name feeds her. And when we made her strong enough to cross into our space, we sealed our fate. Now she'll do anything to keep herself alive. I won't lie. In some twisted way, I understand her desperation. Maybe by telling you this story, I've given her a little more time, a few more moments of existence. Maybe I've shown her a shred of mercy in keeping her alive for just a bit longer. But that's not why I'm telling you this. I'm telling you this because you need to know. You need to be aware of what's happening so you can protect yourself. You need to understand the danger. I'm not saying this to scare you. I'm saying this because your life may depend on it. From this point on, you are a target. Whether you like it or not, she knows you now. She may come for you in months or years or tomorrow. But I'm also giving you the knowledge you need to keep yourself safe. There's only one thing you need to remember, one rule that can save your life. If you see her, if she shows up in your game, on your screen, anywhere, turn it off. Don't hesitate. Don't try to talk to her. Don't try to figure her out. Just turn off the game. One night when I was around 10 or 12, I had a hard time falling asleep. My bedroom took up the entire top floor of our house, with my bed on the left side and storage closets and a play area on the right. As I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, I suddenly heard a soft creaking sound from across the room. My eyes darted to the other side, and there, just outside one of the storage closet doors, was my old rocking horse. To my horror, it began to rock on its own. At first, it was a gentle sway, barely noticeable, but then the rocking picked up, moving more deliberately. I was frozen, watching in disbelief as it rocked its way across the room, creaking with each movement. It continued, seemingly alive, until it stopped abruptly, right beneath the ceiling light, as if it had reached its destination. Panic surged through me. My heart was pounding, and every instinct told me to run, but instead I pulled the covers over my head, trembling. I squeezed my eyes shut, trying to will myself into sleep, or at least to make the terrifying sight go away. I didn't peek out again, not once, until morning. When daylight finally broke, I cautiously emerged from the safety of my blanket. The rocking horse was still sitting in the middle of the room, exactly where it had stopped the night before. It wasn't a dream. My fear was confirmed when my parents reprimanded me at breakfast. They had heard the sound of the rocking horse creaking across the floor late into the night from their bedroom below and assumed I had been up playing with my toys past bedtime. But I hadn't moved a muscle. My older sister has had a ghost following her around for years. I lived with her for about 3 months, and during that time, all kinds of strange things happened. Whenever I brought it up, she'd just shrug and tell me her ghost didn't like me being there. Weird stuff happened constantly, like going to bed with everything locked, lights off, and waking up to find the back door wide open, the lights on, and the kettle boiling. One night, while we were getting ready to go out, I asked to borrow her liquid foundation. I used it, put it back where she kept her makeup, and thought nothing of it. 10 minutes later, she asked me for the foundation, and it was nowhere to be found. She immediately accused me of taking it, and despite my protests, she made me buy her a new one. A year later, while packing to move to a new house, she found it in a shoebox with old letters, inside a zipped-up suitcase under her bed. But the scariest moment happened one afternoon when I was the only one in the house. It was rare to be alone as 4 other people lived there. I had just come home from work and went straight to the bathroom. All the doors and windows were shut. I was standing in front of the mirror, squeezing a pimple on my chin, when I suddenly heard a woman's voice in the hallway say, "Stop picking your zits." The voice was loud, clear, and so real that I laughed, thinking it was my sister. Without looking, I yelled back, "Fuck off!" and casually asked what she wanted for dinner. There was no response. Still thinking it was her, I poked my head out into the hallway, only to find it completely empty. The house was silent. I called her name. No answer. Panic set in as I searched the entire house from room to room, checking every corner and closet, but no one was there. I was utterly alone. My heart raced, and a cold, creeping fear took over. I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't really alone. I bolted out the front door and sat on the porch, refusing to go back inside until someone else came home. Even then, the uneasy feeling lingered. One night, when I was around 10 or 12, I had a hard time falling asleep. My bedroom took up the entire top floor of our house, with my bed on the left side and storage closets and a play area on the right. As I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, I suddenly heard a soft creaking sound from across the room. My eyes darted to the other side, and there, just outside one of the storage closet doors, was my old rocking horse. To my horror, it began to rock on its own. At first, it was a gentle sway, barely noticeable, but then the rocking picked up, moving more deliberately. I was frozen, watching in disbelief as it rocked its way across the room, creaking with each movement. It continued, seemingly alive, until it stopped abruptly, right beneath the ceiling light, as if it had reached its destination. Panic surged through me. My heart was pounding, and every instinct told me to run, but instead I pulled the covers over my head, trembling. I squeezed my eyes shut, trying to will myself into sleep, or at least to make the terrifying sight go away. I didn't peek out again, not once, until morning. When daylight finally broke, I cautiously emerged from the safety of my blanket. The rocking horse was still sitting in the middle of the room, exactly where it had stopped the night before. It wasn't a dream. My fear was confirmed when my parents reprimanded me at breakfast. They had heard the sound of the rocking horse creaking across the floor late into the night from their bedroom below and assumed I had been up playing with my toys past bedtime, but I hadn't moved a muscle. Built in 1904, is a single-family wood frame home sitting on a concrete block foundation. I've been living here for about 12 years now. Among all the strange things my siblings and I have experienced in this house, one event stands out as my favorite. It happened to my brother about 10 years ago. At the time, he and his best friends had formed a garage band, playing mostly Spanish rock, which is alternative music in Spanish. Since his friends could only meet on Sunday afternoons, they would practice into the early evening and usually wrap up by 8 p.m. That was around the time I would come home and head to bed as I worked the graveyard shift. This happened in late fall when the days were getting shorter. After a long practice session, my brother and his friends decided to head to someone else's house. My brother handed his car keys to a friend so they could start loading the equipment. Everyone had already made their way out of the basement. But the tricky part was the path they had to take. They needed to walk to the back of the basement, up the back stairs, through the kitchen, down the hallway, into the living room, and finally out onto the front porch. Eventually everyone was outside, sitting in my brother's truck, waiting for him. As my brother was heading up the back stairs, he remembered he'd left his pancakes in a to-go container sitting on a speaker in the basement. He decided to go back for them. The basement wasn't exactly open and tidy. There were partitions everywhere, with the boiler and main heating unit sitting right in the middle. Just as my brother was about to grab his food, something caught his eye from the corner of the room. It was a shadowy figure, just at the edge of his peripheral vision, and a sudden wave of dread and unease washed over my brother. We were taught that if you ever encountered a spirit or ghost and got a bad vibe, you should either say a quick prayer or curse at it. My brother opted for the latter and basically told it, "Hey, fuck you. I don't have time for this shit." My brother started to walk to the back of the basement and briskly up the stairs, closing doors and turning off lights as he was walking out. The last light switch is on the opposite side of the front door. Luckily, the door was open and the light from the street lamp was flooding the living room with its amber light. My brother said he felt something at his back, but at no point did he turn around. As he flicked the last switch, the living room went dark, as did rest of the house. As he stepped out, he pulled on the door, closing it behind him, still holding his food container in one hand. He jogged down the few porch steps. He walked towards the front gate. Our house resides far from the main street, essentially having a large front yard, but no rear garage. As he closed the gap between himself and his friend-laden truck, he kind of smiled and thought things over in his head, mad at himself for spooking out when there was no reason. He climbed into the driver's side of the truck, putting on his seatbelt and getting ready to pull out of the parking spot directly in front of the house, when one of his friends asked, "Hey, wait, what about your brother? Isn't he coming with us?" My brother answered, "What do you mean? He went to work early tonight. He is already gone. Do you see his car anywhere?" The next question they asked was, "So then who was walking behind you when you were leaving the house?" I was babysitting my niece one evening while staying at my brother's house. They had one of those baby monitors with a camera, so I could keep an eye on her through the small TV that came with it. The house was quiet, and I was sitting at the kitchen table, studying, occasionally glancing at the screen to check on her. Everything seemed fine. She was fast asleep in her crib, the soft hum of the monitor filling the silence. It was late, and I was starting to doze off when I suddenly heard whispering. At first, I thought it might be some kind of feedback or interference from the baby monitor. I shook off the grogginess and leaned in, straining to listen. The whispering continued, faint but distinct, sending a chill down my spine. I looked at the monitor's screen, expecting to see my niece peacefully sleeping as usual. But what I saw instead made my heart stop. There was a shadow, a dark figure, standing near her crib. It wasn't a trick of the light or some blur from the camera. It was there where nothing had been before. The figure was tall, looming, and though it didn't move, the presence of it was unmistakable. I froze, my mind racing, trying to rationalize what I was seeing. But there was no explanation, no logical reason why a shadow like that should be anywhere near my sleeping niece. Panic gripped me. Without thinking, I bolted from the kitchen and ran straight to her room. The hallway seemed to stretch on forever, and my heart pounded louder with every step. When I burst through the door, the room was still. The only sound was the soft whir of the baby monitor behind me. I looked around, half expecting to see something, anything, in the corner or by the crib, but there was nothing. No shadow. Just the dim glow of the nightlight in the corner, and my niece, still sleeping soundly. Despite the calm, I couldn't shake the fear gnawing at me. I scooped her up from her crib and held her tightly, carrying her back to the living room. I sat her down in her playpen, far away from the room. My hands were shaking as I turned back to the monitor, terrified of what I might see. The shadow was gone. I told my brother about it the next day. He listened quietly, his expression darkening as I described the shadow and the whispering. After a long pause, he pulled me aside, away from my sister-in-law. "Don't mention this to her," he said in a low voice. "She'll freak out." I stared at him, confused. "You've seen it too, haven't you?" I asked. He nodded, his face tense. "Several times," he admitted. "The whispering, the shadow, it's always near her crib, but I don't know what to do about it." They stayed in that house for about 4 more years, and nothing else major happened, at least nothing that anyone talked about. But then, when my niece was just starting to talk, she began telling her mom about her special friend. It started as innocent toddler chatter, just the kind of thing little kids say, so no one thought much of it. But over time, the stories got stranger. She would tell her mom that her special friend would visit her at night, or that he liked to stand near her crib and watch over her. My brother was unnerved, but he didn't say anything about what he had seen. We all just tried to brush it off, not wanting to make it more than it was. But when they finally decided to move out of the house, things took a darker turn. My niece, usually cheerful and curious, became inconsolably sad. She didn't want to leave, and she told her mom it was because she would miss her friend. Her mom, trying to comfort her, told her she could bring him along to the new house. But my niece, with the matter-of-factness only a child can have, simply said, "He can't leave the house." That sent chills through all of us. We've never told her about the shadow or the whispering, and she never mentioned seeing it herself. But whatever or whoever her special friend was, it was clear that he or it was tied to that house. To this day, the thought of it still terrifies me. I didn't know what to call it at the time, but it's something that has stayed with me ever since. My wife and I were living in a house in Laguna Beach that had been standing since the 1920s. The place had a strange history. It had been a speakeasy during Prohibition, a brothel at one point, and later on a place for smuggling illegal immigrants. You could feel that it had a past, though neither of us had thought too much about it when we moved in. One afternoon, my wife and I were having a typical argument, one of those trivial spats that married couples have. I can't even recall what it was about now. Frustrated, she decided to walk down the street to grab a cup of coffee and cool off, leaving me alone in the house. The layout of the house was odd, to say the least. It felt like it had been put together piece by piece without much thought. Our bedroom was on one side, and on the opposite side of a hallway was a bathroom, which had 2 doors, one opening to our side and one leading to a second hallway. That second hallway had windows on one side and 2 small bedrooms on the other. From where I stood at my dresser in our bedroom, I could look directly through the bathroom, across the hall, and into that second hallway. I was standing there, maybe still thinking about the argument, or maybe just zoning out, when something caught my eye. It was a flicker of movement at the far end of the hallway, near the other bedrooms. At first, I thought it was just a shadow from the windows, but when I looked directly at it, my heart nearly stopped. There, at the end of the hall, was a black figure. It was about 3 feet tall, and its shape was barely human. It was like nothing I had ever seen before. It looked like scribbles. That's the only way I can describe it, as if someone had taken a pencil and scribbled a rough outline of a person. But the scribbles moved. They twisted and jittered like static, like the crackle of electricity jumping through the air. At first, I wasn't even scared. I just stood there, frozen in disbelief, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. There was no noise, no ominous sounds, just this thing, this living mass of black scribbles, standing at the end of the hallway. It didn't move, but I felt like it was aware of me, like it was just standing there, waiting. And then all of a sudden, it did something that made my blood run cold. It noticed me. I don't know how I knew that. It didn't have a face or eyes or anything like that, but I felt it shift its attention towards me. The air in the room seemed to change, thickening with an unnatural tension. And then, in a split second, it moved. It shot down the hallway, coming straight for me. The way it moved was terrifying. It didn't run or walk. It just rushed at me like a blur of chaotic lines hurtling down the hall. My brain barely had time to process what was happening before it was already halfway across the bathroom, closing the distance between us. That's when the door to the bathroom, the one closest to me, slammed shut. It didn't just close. It slammed with a force that echoed through the house like someone or something had yanked it shut to keep whatever that thing was from reaching me. I finally found my voice and screamed. I called out for my wife, panic coursing through me, but I knew she wasn't home. The house was dead silent again, except for the pounding of my heart in my ears. I didn't dare open the door to see if it was still there. I didn't move. I didn't even breathe. All I could think was that I needed to get out of that house. I bolted. I ran straight outside into the sunlight, my legs barely holding me up as I stumbled onto the front lawn. I stood there, panting, looking back at the house like it was something out of a nightmare, trying to make sense of what had just happened. I didn't go back inside until my wife came home 10 minutes later. Even then, I refused to go near the bathroom, and I didn't tell her the full story right away. I didn't believe in ghosts or anything like that, but I knew I had seen something real, something that to this day I can't explain. Sarah, a single mother, had recently purchased a sleek new smartphone. One evening, after a tiring day, she placed her phone on the kitchen counter and headed to the living room to relax. Her young son, Ethan, quickly approached her, eyes sparkling with curiosity. "Can I play with your new phone, Mommy?" he asked. Sarah hesitated, but trusting her son, agreed, cautioning him not to call anyone or send messages. As the night wore on, Sarah's exhaustion grew. She tucked Ethan into bed and prepared to retire for the night. But when she returned to her room, Ethan was nowhere to be found. Panic set in as she frantically searched the house. Finally, she found him fast asleep on her bed, the phone clutched tightly in his small hands. Relieved, Sarah took the phone from Ethan and began to inspect it. She noticed a few minor changes Ethan had made to the wallpaper and settings, but nothing alarming. Then, she opened her saved images. As she scrolled through the photos, a chill ran down her spine. A new picture, taken by someone else, had appeared. The photo showed Ethan sleeping peacefully on her bed, but above him, in the reflection of the phone's screen, was the haunting image of an elderly woman's face. Only the left half of the woman's face was visible, her eyes fixed on Ethan with a chilling intensity. Sarah's heart pounded as she stared at the image, a wave of dread washing over her. Who was the woman? How had the photo been taken? Had Ethan been playing with the phone's camera without her knowledge? Or was there something more sinister at play? The more Sarah thought about it, the more convinced she became that the image was not a coincidence. A sense of unease settled over her home, and she couldn't shake the feeling that she was being watched. As the days turned into weeks, Sarah's anxiety grew. She began to notice strange occurrences around the house. Doors would creak open on their own, shadows would flicker in the corners of her vision, and she would often hear faint whispers coming from the empty rooms. Ethan, too, seemed to be affected. He began to have nightmares and would often wake up screaming in the middle of the night. Desperate for answers, Sarah decided to consult a local psychic. The psychic, a woman named Evelyn, listened to Sarah's story with a grave expression. "The woman in the photo," Evelyn said, "is a spirit attached to your phone. She is trying to communicate with you." Evelyn explained that the spirit was likely a former owner of the phone who had died under tragic circumstances. She was trapped in the phone, unable to move on. The spirit was drawn to Ethan because of his innocence and purity. She was trying to reach out to Sarah for help. With Evelyn's guidance, Sarah began to perform rituals to cleanse her home and the phone. She placed crystals around the house, burned sage, and said prayers. Slowly, the strange occurrences began to subside. Ethan's nightmares also became less frequent. One evening, as Sarah was sitting on her couch, she felt a sudden chill. She looked up and saw the ghostly figure of the elderly woman standing in the doorway. The woman's eyes held a mixture of sadness and gratitude. With a nod, she turned and faded away. From that day forward, Sarah felt a sense of peace. She knew that the spirit had finally found the rest she had been seeking. And though she would never forget the haunting image of the woman's face, she was grateful for the experience. It had taught her the importance of being mindful of the energy we bring into our lives and the power of compassion and understanding. But the story didn't end there. As time passed, Sarah began to feel a strange connection to the elderly woman. She would often find herself thinking about the woman's life, wondering about her joys, her sorrows, and her dreams. One day, while browsing through an antique shop, Sarah came across a vintage photograph. It was a picture of a young woman smiling radiantly. The woman in the photo bore a striking resemblance to the ghostly figure she had seen. Intrigued, Sarah bought the photograph and took it home. She placed it next to the phone, hoping that it would somehow help the spirit find peace. That night, as Sarah slept, she dreamed of the woman. In her dream, the woman thanked Sarah for her kindness and told her a story about her life. She had been a young mother, just like Sarah, when she had tragically lost her life in a car accident. The phone had been a gift from her husband, and she had cherished it dearly. When Sarah woke up, she felt a sense of closure. She knew that the spirit had finally found peace, and that she had played a small part in her journey. From that day forward, Sarah carried the photograph with her as a reminder of the woman she had helped and the power of compassion and understanding. Weeks turned into months, and the unsettling events surrounding the phone gradually faded into a distant memory. Sarah continued to live her life, always mindful of the strange encounter she had experienced. She often thought about the woman in the photograph, wondering about the life she could have lived. And though she never forgot the haunting image of the woman's face, she carried it with a sense of peace and gratitude. A friend of mine introduced me to Google Maps one day, and it felt like opening a door to a world I had been barred from. You've probably seen it, the satellite images that let you explore locations all over the globe from the comfort of your home. Ever since my car accident a few years ago, I've struggled to leave my house. Just the thought of a car whizzing by sends a wave of dizziness through me. But here, on Google Maps, I could explore the world without stepping outside. I could virtually walk down streets, wandering through cities like I was really there, and it fascinated me. Before long, I was hooked. I began to explore almost every major city I could think of: Tokyo, Paris, London, Berlin. I took virtual strolls along the Great Barrier Reef and wandered through Dracula's castle. Each click opened up new landscapes, stories, and lives, even if they were all captured in still frames. My favorite game became searching for random places in bustling cities, hunting for people and animals, and observing their everyday lives. I'd laugh at the oddities, like the woman in a red dress, seemingly oblivious to the world around her. She must have good taste, I joked to myself as I zoomed in on a woman walking along a Tokyo street. I noticed her gray bag hanging from a gray and purple shoulder strap, swaying gently with her relaxed strides. One hand trailed along the wall beside her, and though her face was blurred to protect her privacy, I imagined it was adorned with a carefree smile. As I stared at her, a wave of melancholy washed over me. I let my hands fall onto the arms of my wheelchair, wishing desperately that I could join her, to be out in the world, walking without a care. But I was stuck here, in this chair. I sighed deeply and decided I'd seen enough for one night. I turned off the computer and headed to bed, my dreams haunted by her image. The next morning, I woke up early and decided to explore Paris, a city I'd always adored. I loved the old, beautiful buildings and the bustling atmosphere. I zoomed into a random area, landing on a charming street lined with brick buildings, quaint shops, and an old tan brick church. As I spun the view around, I noticed a variety of people. A balding businessman hurrying past an older woman with a scarf, a curvy woman in black pants staring into a shop window, and two women shepherding a group of small children around a corner. Then something caught my eye. There, sitting on a bench at the bus stop, was a familiar figure. A young woman with her feet planted casually in front of her, wearing black pants, a white t-shirt, and a black hooded jacket. My heart raced as I recognized the red sneakers, just like my own. A gray bag rested on the bench beside her, the shoulder strap hooked over her shoulder. This is crazy, I thought. It can't possibly be her. This was a different country, a different continent. How could it be the same woman? I shook my head, dismissing the notion. These images were taken in advance, stored away for us to view at our convenience. She could just be a traveler, and brown hair was a common color. Those sneakers were a popular choice. I had ordered mine online, just like countless others. Still, a nagging feeling tugged at me as I went to fix some lunch. When I returned to my computer, I decided to check out Berlin. I picked a random street. It looked empty, lined with brick buildings that resembled factories. I scanned the street for any signs of life, but found nothing more than a kid dressed for school, his jacket thrown over his bag. Just as I was about to leave, I noticed a flash of red, her sneakers again. She was there, standing on a street corner next to a signpost, looking down the street as if she were waiting to cross. I froze in shock. How could she be here too? Even if she was traveling, finding her in both Paris and Berlin felt impossibly coincidental. Was this a bizarre joke? Had Google decided to play a prank on dedicated users like me? I quickly searched for mentions of a woman appearing on Google Maps, hoping for some insight, but found nothing. My mind raced. Had my self-imposed isolation driven me to madness? Was I so lonely that I had conjured up an imaginary companion? I left the Berlin image on my screen and sent a text to a friend, asking him to check the locations and see if he could spot the woman. I waited, anxiety making my hands clammy and my heart racing. After 10 tense minutes, my phone beeped with a reply. I see the lady you're talking about in Berlin. Didn't see her in Paris or Tokyo. Is this some kind of game? Are you okay? I didn't respond immediately. I was too busy flipping back through the locations in Tokyo and Paris. There she was again. In Paris, she was no longer seated on the bench, but was now standing in front of it, rummaging through her bag. In Tokyo, she was blocks away, squatting to pet a calico cat. Who was she? What was happening? I switched to Brussels, trying to clear my head. I scanned the streets, lined with old buildings and shops. At first, it felt like a relief when I didn't see her. But then, just as I was about to leave, I caught sight of a white building with a black ironwork framed balcony. I had been focusing on the sidewalks, and there she was, standing on the balcony, her head tilted coyly toward the camera. My breath caught in my throat. I switched to Sydney. There she was again, leaning against the wall inside a bright blue Carrick's pharmacy building. In London, she was preparing to step onto a red double-decker bus, glancing over her shoulder as if she knew I was watching. I felt my heart pounding, like a trapped bird slamming against its cage. She was everywhere I looked. Venice, Zurich, Hong Kong. In each image, she came closer to looking directly at me, her face always blurred, yet somehow hauntingly familiar. I couldn't catch my breath. My mind raced with confusion and fear. Should I call the police? Was this even something they could help with? What would I say? I clenched my fists tightly and closed my eyes. Who was she? Was she following me? Or was I following her? The questions consumed me. I wished I could see her face, know what she was thinking as she looked back at me. I wanted to leap from my chair and run, but the only thing that made me feel free, the only thing that offered me a glimpse of the world, was also the thing that made me feel more trapped than ever. I needed to know. My name is Jason Miller, and I want to share a chilling story about an experience my uncle had in a small town in Louisiana, near the bayou. It was a warm summer evening when my uncle decided to take a stroll through the local park, known for its ancient oak trees and sprawling green spaces. One tree in particular stood out, a massive, gnarled oak that locals believed was haunted. Stories circulated about a ghost who lingered there, known as the Spirit of the Oak, said to be the restless soul of a young woman who had met a tragic end many years ago. As my uncle walked closer to the tree, he couldn't shake the feeling that he was being watched. The air around him grew still, and an eerie silence enveloped the area. Curious about the legends, he approached the tree to take a closer look. Its twisted branches loomed overhead, creating a canopy that blocked out the fading light. Suddenly, he noticed something unusual, a faint shimmering light emanating from the base of the tree. Intrigued, he leaned in closer. That's when he saw her, a woman dressed in a flowing white gown, her hair cascading like dark waves over her shoulders. She seemed to be kneeling beside the tree, lost in thought, her expression melancholic. "Excuse me, are you all right?" my uncle called out, his voice shaking slightly. The woman looked up, her eyes filled with sorrow, and slowly extended her hand toward him. In that moment, my uncle felt an overwhelming sense of sadness wash over him. The air around him grew colder, and he could hear faint whispers as if the wind carried the echoes of lost voices. Compelled by a force he couldn't explain, he took a step closer. "Who are you?" he asked gently, hoping to understand her plight. The woman's lips moved, but no sound escaped. Instead, she pointed to the tree, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. Suddenly, the ground beneath my uncle's feet shifted, and he stumbled back. When he looked up again, the woman had vanished, leaving only the soft rustling of leaves behind. My uncle stood there, heart racing, trying to process what had just happened. Determined to uncover the truth, he returned the next day, armed with a notebook to jot down everything he could find. After speaking with some locals, he learned that the tree was indeed tied to a tragic story. Decades ago, a young woman had been in love with a local man. On the night they were supposed to elope, a terrible storm hit, and she was tragically struck by lightning while trying to reach him. With each story he heard, my uncle felt the weight of the woman's sorrow deepening. He realized that she was trapped between worlds, yearning for closure and peace. That evening, he returned to the oak tree, this time with a bouquet of wildflowers and a small candle. Kneeling at the base of the tree, he lit the candle and whispered a few words of remembrance, offering his respects to the lost soul. He placed the flowers gently at the foot of the tree, hoping to bring her some comfort. As he stood there, he felt a gentle breeze brush against him, as if the very air was thanking him for acknowledging her pain. The whispers he had heard before grew faint, replaced by a profound sense of calm. From that day on, my uncle visited the tree regularly, sharing stories with friends and family about the spirit he had encountered. He learned to respect the stories of the past and the power they held in shaping the present. Years later, as he recounted the tale to me, he said he felt that by honoring the woman's memory, he had helped her find peace. The ancient oak, once feared, became a symbol of love lost and the enduring connection between the living and the departed. My name is Daniel Rivers, and I want to share a haunting tale that my grandmother often told me about an experience she had at an old chapel in a small town in West Virginia. Years ago, when she was a young woman, she and her friends decided to explore an abandoned chapel that was said to be haunted. It was a place steeped in local lore, known for the ghost of a bride who was tragically jilted on her wedding day. According to the legend, she had wandered the grounds, forever searching for her lost love, dressed in her white wedding gown. One warm summer evening, fueled by curiosity and a sense of adventure, my grandmother and her friends drove to the chapel. As they approached the crumbling structure, the sun began to set, casting long shadows over the overgrown path that led to the entrance. The air was thick with a sense of foreboding, but their excitement outweighed their fear. Inside, the chapel was eerie and beautiful, with stained glass windows casting ghostly colors across the dust-covered floor. My grandmother and her friends decided to split up to explore the different rooms, but they agreed to meet back in the main hall after a short while. As she wandered through the dimly lit corridors, my grandmother felt a chill run down her spine. The air grew colder, and she could hear whispers echoing off the walls. Just as she was about to turn back, she caught a glimpse of something white moving at the far end of the hallway. Curiosity piqued. She followed it, her heart racing with both fear and excitement. When she turned the corner, she was met with a breathtaking sight. There, standing in the fading light, was a figure in a beautiful white gown. The bride's hair flowed down her back, and her face was partially obscured by a veil. My grandmother froze, unable to take her eyes off the ethereal figure. The bride seemed to be gazing out of a window, lost in thought. "Hello?" my grandmother called out, her voice trembling slightly. The figure turned slowly, revealing a sorrowful expression. My grandmother felt a wave of sadness wash over her as the bride raised a hand, gesturing for her to come closer. Compelled by an unseen force, my grandmother took a step forward, but as she did, the bride began to fade into the air as if she were nothing more than mist. In that moment, my grandmother felt an overwhelming sense of loss and longing. She realized that the bride was trapped between worlds, eternally searching for her lost love. Heartbroken, my grandmother called out, "I'm here. What do you need?" The bride paused for a moment, looking back over her shoulder. Her eyes shimmered with unshed tears, and my grandmother felt a deep connection, as if the bride was pleading for help to find peace. But just as quickly as she had appeared, the bride was gone, leaving only a lingering sense of sorrow in the air. Shaken, my grandmother returned to the main hall where her friends were waiting. They could see the change in her demeanor and urged her to share what had happened. As she recounted her encounter, her friends listened intently, their expressions a mix of fear and fascination. That night, they decided to leave the chapel, but my grandmother couldn't shake the feeling that she had to do something for the bride. She suggested they gather flowers from the nearby woods and place them by the chapel's entrance as a tribute to the lost soul. The following day, they returned with a bouquet of wildflowers and laid them gently at the chapel's threshold. My grandmother whispered a promise to the bride that she would remember her story and share it with others. From that day forward, the tale of the bride in white became a cherished memory, passed down through generations. My grandmother often spoke of that night, sharing how the encounter had left a profound mark on her soul. She believed that by acknowledging the bride's pain, they had helped ease her restless spirit, if only just a little. Though the chapel eventually crumbled away, the legend of the bride in white lived on, reminding everyone that love, even when lost, can resonate through time. And sometimes a simple act of kindness can help guide a lost soul home. My name is Dylan Walker, and I've spent most of my life in the small rural town of Willow Creek, deep in the heart of Tennessee. There's a large park on the outskirts of town that's home to an old oak tree, massive and ancient. Locals have passed by it for generations, but no one dares linger near it after dark. The tree has a sinister reputation, one that's been whispered about since before I was born. They say something evil resides there. Some call it a spirit, others a demon. But around here, people just refer to it as the haunt. Stories of strange occurrences and unexplainable events around the tree have circulated for years. Disembodied whispers, the feeling of being watched, and most chilling of all, the appearance of a shadowy figure that seems to emerge from the roots when the moon is high. I never believed any of it. I thought the stories were just local folklore, meant to scare kids from wandering too far into the woods. But that changed one summer night when I found out the truth the hard way. It was a hot July evening, and my friends and I were looking for something to do. The town doesn't offer much for entertainment, so we decided to hang out at the park, like we often did when boredom struck. My best friend Evan had always been a bit of a thrill seeker, and he came up with the brilliant idea to go near the old oak tree. "Let's see if the stories are true," he said, his tone daring. "It's just an old tree. What's the worst that could happen?" There were 5 of us. Evan, me, and a few other buddies. We laughed nervously as we made our way to the edge of the park where the tree stood towering against the twilight sky, its branches spread wide, casting dark, spider-like shadows across the ground. The closer we got, the more uneasy I felt. I don't know if it was the thick, humid air or the silence that had suddenly fallen over the park, but something didn't feel right. Still, I brushed it off. I didn't want to be the one who chickened out. We reached the tree and stood in a small circle beneath its massive canopy. For a while, nothing happened. We joked and teased each other about being scared of an old tree, our voices sounding a little too loud in the eerie stillness. But then, as we began to relax, something changed. It started with a low hum, almost like a faint buzzing sound, coming from the direction of the tree's trunk. We stopped talking, and in that moment of silence, we all heard it. Soft, but unmistakable, a whisper. At first, I thought it was the wind, but there was no wind, and the whispering grew louder, like a voice just out of reach. It seemed to be coming from the tree itself, from the very bark and roots beneath us. Evan, always the bold one, took a few steps closer. "Hello," he called out, as if expecting someone to answer. We watched as he leaned toward the base of the tree, squinting into the growing darkness. Then we saw it. A shadow, darker than the night around it, rising up from the roots. It had no form, no clear shape, but it moved, creeping upwards as if drawn by Evan's voice. The rest of us stood frozen, unable to process what we were seeing. Evan turned around, a confused look on his face. And that's when it happened. The shadow lunged. Evan screamed as something grabbed him, pulling him toward the tree. His arms flailed as he tried to break free, but whatever it was too strong. In the chaos, I could see the look of terror in his eyes, a raw panic I had never seen before. We ran. We didn't stop to help him, didn't try to fight whatever had him. We just ran as fast as we could, the screams echoing in our ears as we bolted through the park, not daring to look back. When we finally reached safety, gasping for breath, we realized Evan wasn't with us. We stood in silence, too afraid to go back. After what felt like hours, we called the police. A search was organized, but they found nothing. No trace of Evan, no evidence that he had ever been at the park. The town was shaken by his disappearance, but life moved on, as it always does. The park was declared off-limits at night, and the rumors about the tree only grew. Some say Evan still lingers there, another victim of the old oak's curse. Others believe that whatever took him was something far worse, something ancient and malevolent. As for me, I've never set foot in that park again. Sometimes late at night, I'll hear the faint sound of whispering when the wind blows, and I wonder if it's the same voice we heard that night. But I'll never know for sure, because I'm never going back to find out. The old oak tree still stands there today, casting its long shadows over Willow Creek. And while most people in town would rather forget what happened, there's a part of me that knows the truth. Something is waiting beneath those roots, something dark and hungry, and it's only a matter of time before it claims someone else. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel, like, comment, and share the video. See you next time.